Hello and welcome to Real Menopause Talk. Lara Briden is one of the good ones. When you want real information or a solution to a problem, Lara is one of the people I highly recommend you go to. No fads, no sell, no bro science, just truth founded on deep understanding and experience. Women's health, especially when it comes to menstrual health, metabolic and hormone health, is where her expertise will serve you really well. In this conversation that we have today, we cover a broad spectrum of topics, all of which I feel are relevant and very regularly crop up. So we put to rights insulin resistance, metabolism, testosterone for women, HRT, the scale as a tool, the hormonal difference between peri and post-menopause, and what menopause even means right now. Before we dive headlong into our conversation, I would like to remind you about my life and performance coaching offer. I blend human design with energetic realignment and intentional nourishment so that you can rediscover your strengths, passions, and purpose. The way this transforms people is truly remarkable. My clients come to me feeling as though they've sort of lost their way a bit. They lack direction and just feel unsettled and dissatisfied. Working together for only a few weeks brings radical change, a lightness and freedom to be your true, brilliant self. And then everything else just slots into place. If you'd like to know more, then drop me a line, Hattie, Hatty, at realmenopausetalk.com. So the name remains the same for the time being. And now on with the show. Here is Lara Briden. Lara, it is wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much for coming today and spending time with me. What I love about your approach is that it's open, honest, and it gives women information and therefore options. No shoulds, no agenda, just looking at women's health, including the role of the menstrual cycle, which many see as one of the key vital signs, as it can tell us so much about our health. So thank you for your role in bringing this key part of our existence into the light. There is so much that I would like to ask you, discuss with you, and really clarify for people today, as there are many words, many terms that seem to be increasingly used on the internet and often misunderstood. But to begin with, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, perhaps where you grew up, your wildly varied work life, so that people get a sense of who you are?
Thanks so much for having me, Hattie. It's fun to be here on your podcast. And I agree. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of medical terminology being thrown around on social media right now. We'll circle back to that. I actually had one comment from someone lately. He's like, "Who knew you had to be a biochemist just to go through, that perimenopause means everyone has to immediately become a biochemist to be able to understand all the hormones." So my background is, well, I'm Canadian, that's the accent, although I live in New Zealand currently. So it's evening here, actually. And I lived in Sydney for a long time. So I've been about 25 years down here in total, but I haven't lost my Canadian accent. And so I grew up in rural, small town Canada. And my first career, and this is relevant, actually, I worked as an evolutionary biologist, and I recently had a chance to go back and read one of my, a few of my papers, but including one of my peer-reviewed papers from back then. It was all into sex differences in foraging behavior of animals. So I was like, wow, I was really fired up about female physiology all the way back then. From the very beginning, I sort of had this reframing of, it was really important to me to frame female physiology as the standard normal version of physiology and males the quirky variant. So men are weird. I mean, they make their hormones every day, whereas we make ours on a monthly cycle during our reproductive years. So yeah, it's just about, there's nothing about, there's nothing about the female body that is broken, or
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing wrong with us. And if there are sex differences, then they're just differences, and you could even frame men as being the ones that are a little weird.
I love that. And yes, I wish for everybody to believe that the fact that us being referred to as broken either infuriates me or breaks my heart, depending on the day. But it's a real misnomer. So I'm really glad you said that.
Mm-hmm. I was going to respond to what you said about like all the sort of the. I think it's with the rise of social media. It's actually really just been in the last couple of years, people using a lot of medical terminology to try to describe their own experience. So because where I see it, I just certainly see it on social media and in my comment sections. Like I said, someone just the other day saying, "Oh, who knew you had to become a biochemist just to try to understand perimenopause?" Which you don't, by the way. But also with my work with patients, because I'm not full time with patients anymore, but I still love to see them because I just I'm just curious. I like hearing about people's stories, and I love the things they say and ask me, and hopefully, they get better. That's part of the joy of it as well. But interaction really stuck out with me because, unlike even just a few years ago, people used to talk more in terms of, they would tell me, okay, I'm fatigued, I have brain fog, or I'm anxious, or, like all different things, or like I have digestive bloating, or like tangible symptoms that you can describe. This one patient was just talking pretty much exclusively in terms of, well, my cortisol is spiking, and then my dopamine's dropping, and my ADHD is kicking in. And I'm like, what does that? Okay, fine, but like, what does that actually mean? Like in terms of your symptoms? Because in her case, we went on to discover there were actually some other things going on. It wasn't, her cortisol spiking. She's like, for one example, she had iron deficiency, and there were some other things happening that were quite tangible and concrete and fixable things too, which is why precision in language and like trying to actually, describe symptoms rather than presumed biochemical mechanisms can be helpful for practitioners. Yeah.
Yes, I think so often there is so much information on the internet, and, I think immediately of Instagram, but I know there are other platforms as well, where people who may or may not, most likely not, be qualified to use these terms with authority, particularly given that they are speaking out to who knows which people are watching. Yeah. And they use terms like cortisol spiking, or your dopamine dropping, or whatever levels of whatever hormone you decide to choose that day. And so as a person who's experiencing symptoms, it's very easy to latch onto that as, this must be what's happening, without any concrete proof. So also, because I keep hearing the same phrase, cortisol is the enemy of the midlife woman, I don't believe this to be true, because we need it to exist. Of course, chronic levels of cortisol, whole different ballgame. But could you just clarify for people what this all means?
I think maybe what's being described there, we're very much in this game. I don't just mean you and me. I mean broadly, like in this game of like, these are like code words. It's like, what is being described here? Like, so what I think it's actually about describing the nervous system. I mean, there is some degree of nervous system recalibration during perimenopause for sure. And as alongside that is a temporarily reduced ability to cope with stress, and, temporarily disturbed sleep over the years of the neurological transition. And so that can feel very obviously tangible and real. And so women are just looking for language to describe. Do you agree? I think the word cortisol often gets used is two things. I think it gets used to describe nervous system symptoms generally. And then it also ties into that kind of weight gain around the middle, which we can circle back to that. But those are the sort of the two areas that it's used for?
I think so. And you're absolutely right when you say looking for language, because many of us came into perimenopause being clueless as to what was happening to us, and now having the desire to express what's happening, how it feels, finding the language. It's just sometimes we misuse it when we're learning.
Well, and it's not, I mean, it's not anyone's fault. I mean, this is a broader, I mean, if people are interested in this topic more generally, like way beyond women's health or perimenopause or anything, there is a book. It's somewhat controversial, but I'm going to mention it anyway because I really thought it was interesting. It's called The Age of Diagnosis by Susan O'Sullivan. Have you heard? It's quite medical in some ways, but like it just breaks down like this. We've had this burgeoning, like what started as diagnoses have, it's called diagnosis creep or diagnosis expansion. Like they just expand to like something, include more and more people and more symptoms. And at some point that's like almost anyone. I mean, as soon as you have, and I guess I would sort of, to some extent, use perimenopause as an example. As soon as you have like, okay, there are like 150 symptoms of perimenopause. I mean, for one thing, I don't agree with that at all. But like, as soon as you've got with anything like a long list of symptoms that include things like, fatigue and trouble sleeping and like really nebulous things that a lot of people have, and then it creates this large net, is the way I describe it. Like you throw it out there, you're like, if you have any of these symptoms, you're in perimenopause. Well, that's going to be pretty much anyone at that point. Like that, so with that diagnosis expansion comes loss of precision or sort of clarity about what's really going on. Like my patient I described earlier, who, I mean, she just put, I said, what's your main concern? She just put perimenopause. And then, obviously it was all in terms of cortisol spiking. And then actually in the end of the day, like she actually had, and just as an example, like iron deficiency and sleep apnea. So like it was much more, precise. So I guess, and I don't want this, it's hard to, I don't want people to have a sense of like words they should or shouldn't use. It's not about that. I mean, just know that those modes of description are changing every generation. So I've been doing this long enough, 30 or 35 years in practice, whatever it has been now, that definitely every decade, but every 5 years, there's a whole new set of things. So like back in the 90s, it was, a lot of people had candida, and then it was like hypoglycemia. And I mean, those are all legitimate, those are all things, but like they were kind of the umbrella diagnosis. So then there was like leaky gut, and there's all different, depending on, especially in natural health, like especially as depending on which generation you're in, or every 5 years is a whole different set of like diagnoses we're using for kind of the same symptoms and sort of the same problems in a way that often requires some of the similar, like, so what we used to be called candida, we now talk about in terms of microbiome, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. It's just an evolving terminology. So, I mean, we're getting a little bit into the weeds here, but I think it's important. Even if it gives people just, a pause to, just think about, you don't have to use those technical terms. You could just describe to the practitioner your symptoms.
So if you are worried about cortisol, what is its role? How does it function? When should you possibly be concerned?
Okay. And again, so with my own patients, I mean, this might be a good starting place. I don't test cortisol. I mean, I used to actually, as maybe a younger naturopath. I mean, I just find it of limited utility now to actually get level, because the way I've heard it described actually by scientists is the cortisol can be a biomarker for stress. It's basically just an indication of stress, but the body's ability to cope with stress. So, but that doesn't mean that's the only thing going on. Like obviously, if the body's under stress, there's the whole autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic, parasympathetic. Like there's many elements that are part of that stress response. It might be disrupting sleep. So, I mean, obviously, in very technical terms, cortisol is a steroid hormone made by the adrenal glands. It's a survival hormone. Like we actually die without it. And just to compare and contrast, so thyroid and hormone and estrogen, you could be quite deficient for quite a long time, and you feel it, and like there's effects from it, but you're not. It's not life. So cortisol is the kind of hormone, if it's too low, you would die actually, quite quickly. So it's actually, it is a very essential hormone. And it's on I guess one important thing to know about cortisol that's kind of helpful is it's on a circadian rhythm. So it goes up in the morning and then should sort of go down during the day. And people who do measure cortisol are often trying to get a cortisol curve to see if it's doing that proper up in the morning and then down. It should be relatively low overnight. And so that can be interesting to track those cortisol curves. But again, you can often sort of get the same information just from asking people, how well do you sleep? Basically, what's happening with your sleep? Do you feel anxious in the morning? I think the other place that cortisol is coming into the conversation, correct me if you think this is not right, but it is known that cortisol will worsen insulin resistance. So I think cortisol is part of what people are targeting for the middle weight gain that women experience with perimenopause. So we could talk about that a little bit more and the mechanisms of that. And again, so talk about it in terms that don't specifically involve cortisol. Yeah.
I think that would be really interesting, actually, particularly because, again, insulin occasionally is misunderstood or misinterpreted, or another part of the hunt for the language to explain what we're feeling and going through.
For sure. But that's demonstrated in scientific literature as well, that there's a redistribution in body fat from the lower body to visceral fat. It's quite dramatic, actually. It's I think some studies found that the amount of visceral fat will increase by 50% during our 40s.
Wow, that's much higher than I knew.
Yeah. So some of that, there's a section in my book. It's not just about cortisol. I mean, spoiler. It's not. Cortisol may play a role, but the main drivers is actually in relative reduction. So obviously reduction in estrogen and progesterone, both. And then the relative rise of testosterone compared to those. So testosterone does not go up, obviously. I mean, weirdly, the adrenal androgens do go up like just ever so slightly and temporarily. But in the female body, even a relative androgen or testosterone excess, which is by relative, I mean estrogen and progesterone have dropped away, then that testosterone shining through is responsible for most of that redistribution of body fat and also promotes insulin resistance in women. So yeah, I'm curious to talk to you about this because obviously you're in the industry and curious to get some of your feedback. So, I mean, obviously my third book is about insulin resistance. I do feel like it's a significant condition that sort of requires attention. But I do know also, like through the years of decades now of trying to help women with it, there's something about it conceptually, or maybe even just the words themselves, insulin resistance, that doesn't really connect with people. And there's also this element of kind of shame around it. So a compare and contrast I've done is, if I tell a woman that she, has Hashimoto's thyroid disease, the common hormonal thyroid condition, she is just like obviously will just absorb that information and be looking for solutions. Okay, what do we do? But as soon as I talk about there being an insulin resistance, which I consider a hormonal condition, the reaction is a shame reaction, like immediately, like, oh my goodness, I didn't, what have I done wrong to do this? And I think that's because of the conventional narrative, which has been that weight gain comes first, and weight gain is purely just, from laziness and overeating. That's in the conventional narrative. And then that causes insulin resistance. But as I try to make the case in the book, and my view of the science is actually it's the other way around. I mean, various aspects of our modern world are impairing insulin sensitivity, causing insulin resistance not through people's fault. Certainly the shift to insulin resistance that happens at perimenopause is no one's fault. That's just, hormonally what's happening. And so I think and then the weight gain comes secondary to that, potentially in many cases, certainly visceral weight gain can. So yeah, I mean, this is where, in my experience with insulin resistance too, the other thing to say about it is I find the people who are most kind of knowledgeable about it, or maybe testing insulin or looking for, ways to balance their insulin, are people who don't need to, actually. Because whenever I share about insulin resistance on my social media, I get lots of women sharing, oh, my insulin reading's this, or my HOMA-IR is this. These are all tests for insulin. And I'm like, you are fine. None of that suggests insulin resistance. But it's people who quietly in the background kind of don't probably know that they have it. I mean, are your clients testing for it?
By looking at their own symptoms and deciding for themselves almost that they do have it or they don't have it. Because if they're looking for a solution to, the weight gain, then before they come to me, they will be looking for reasons, and excuses is exactly the wrong word, but I suppose it is more reasons why this has happened to them, and then the way out. So rather than maybe addressing something more simple, they're going to go for the harder route and then assume that it's a malfunction or something broken or wrong, or rather than something that's just not working in their favor and can be easily tweaked and improved upon.
Sure. Yeah. So, okay, now that's a good sort of starting place. So I think, insulin resistance is something not working properly, but it's reversible. It
Exactly.
is a sort of descriptive, but it is, I think, importantly through my lens, it does some of its downstream effects. So I think when impaired insulin sensitivity is happening, is the reality for people, it can very much, the biggest problem is that it does impair the body's ability to access fat stores for energy, not just in terms of being ability to burn fat, but actually the ability to access fat, like your own body fat stores for energy. I think it's not a guessing game though. I guess, there is a chapter in my book about diagnosis, but I realize now it's very simple. There's some very simple markers. It's on a blood test that anyone has, probably from their GP, is the blood marker. It's one of the liver functions. It's called ALT. It doesn't cost anything. It's probably sitting there already in people's report. If ALT in women if it's greater than 18 or 19, that strongly suggests insulin resistance and fatty liver. And if it's in a high ratio compared to AST. So kind of those two, that marker is very helpful. Also, elevated triglycerides fasting triglycerides is quite a strong marker. And the reason, I guess, for me as a clinician, I feel it is important to really only measure or look for markers for something that can be acted upon, right? Like in the case of, we just talked about how I often don't find it helpful to identify high cortisol because I can see it already with, dysregulated nervous system. But in the case of insulin resistance, there can be other. So it's not just, I guess what I'm saying is it's not just diet and exercise that can correct it. There are, as I talk about in the book, there can be hormonal aspects. This sort of, there can be the gut inflammation can play a role. So there are different ways to kind of troubleshoot what maybe might be driving insulin resistance. And then once you correct it, everything else, then, appetite will sort of normalize and people will find that they can get results from the same sort of, diet and exercise regimen that what they weren't able to get results from before. But obviously, you're a fitness trainer, so you're, obviously you would sort of feel like the diet and exercise is primary. I guess that's a little bit, we're different in that. I think the diet and exercise will have to be there, but sometimes some women are just so exhausted and so like impaired really in their ability for energy that they find it hard to stick with things like that.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And that's where I would refer them to relevant people. I do what I can to fix things with food and exercise. I think an awful lot can be achieved just with food. But then when it gets to be more complex or deeper, absolutely refer out. And then we work together and then hopefully people feel better.
And just to give another example of an area where the chronically elevated insulin is kind of primary in terms of sort of the mechanisms of what's going wrong would be polycystic ovary syndrome or PCOS. So it will, like in that case, it's actually the chronically elevated insulin that's impairing ovarian function, that's potentially elevating testosterone and promoting facial hair. And actually that in PCOS, you really see where the elevated testosterone creates that weight gain around the middle. The testosterone excess in women does that. That's sort of a mini version of that in perimenopause. Again, as I described earlier, that higher testosterone. So yeah, I mean, I guess I feel like sort of identifying the high, clear signs of the high insulin, which would be the liver function, is can be helpful.
But remedying liver function can be quite straightforward. Would you agree?
It will come down as insulin comes down. So as insulin sensitivity improves, the fatty liver will reverse. And all of this is happening. Actually, a really important thing about all of this is that blood sugar could be normal or even low at times. I had a really fascinating comment on my social media a couple of months ago where I was talking about insulin resistance, and she said, "Oh, I'm pretty confident I don't have that because my blood sugar is low, not high." I'm like, actually, in the early decades of insulin resistance, reactive hypoglycemia or low blood sugar can be one of the symptoms of, it's a common symptom of insulin resistance. So blood sugar wouldn't elevate until much later in the process, which is why, screening for a normal blood sugar on a blood test doesn't really prove anything, or it doesn't rule out the situation. And so just because we talked a little bit off air about the term metabolism being sort of thrown about, obviously. So in the simplest discussion, like when most people, at least scientists anyway, or doctors are talking about metabolism, they're really talking about, metabolism as relates to like metabolic syndrome and cardiovascular and insulin resistance side of metabolism. I mean, technically the word metabolism describes almost everything in the body, including thyroid and everything. So it's, it's kind of more specifically around that picture of, the high triglycerides. And,
So when somebody sees, I'm going to say somebody like me, it won't be me, but a fitness or a nutritionist specialist or somebody who pictures themselves as that, saying, fix your metabolism, reset your metabolism is broken, you've messed up your metabolism by years and years of chronic dieting. What do they mean? And what would you prefer they say?
No, you're right. And again, these terms, you're right. Metabolism is a very nebulous term. And I think depending on who's using the term, they could mean different things. So what you just said there, like, you've messed up your metabolism from a history of dieting. That's something different. That in that use of the word, that is not now referring to the insulin resistance that I've been talking about. That would sort of be this adaptation from sort of low, a reaction to caloric restriction in the past. So that's something different. Yeah, no, I agree. It's quite a nebulous term. I guess, this is why I actually prefer to use the word insulin resistance. Like to be a bit more precise about what we're talking about. But metabolism seems to resonate with people more. So I think that's why people use it. And I guess the thing to understand about metabolism, I guess it can mean all different things, but in almost any sense, it's adaptable. I mean, it is going to change, with sort of correcting underlying issues. And the other thing I'd say about it is, I said this a few minutes ago, but people have this automatic sort of shame reaction, like they've done something wrong. Oh, I've messed up my metabolism. Like, just compare and contrast that to like thyroid disease. People don't automatically say, "Oh, I've messed up my thyroid." I mean, some people might, but most people aren't like, "Oh, I've messed up my thyroid," or "I've messed up my ovarian function." Like, you don't think about in that terms. It's more realistically for any of these things, it's impairment and reversible in many cases. Impairment that's happened as the result of, very often environmental toxins and multi-generational exposure to the modern food environment. So
yes,
it is true. I mean, it is a fact that people are physiologically facing. It's a more challenging time to be a human today than it was, a few decades ago. People just did not simply did not used to have to micromanage their diet and exercise. If you look back, sort of photos from the 60s and 70s, like people were just, I mean, sure, some people probably were dieting, but like a lot of people were just living their lives. And so something has gone a little bit dysregulated. And I would, through my lens anyway, part of it is to do with the way the combination of environmental toxins and the modern food environment impairs normal satiety mechanisms, which are pretty closely tied to insulin sensitivity mechanisms. See, I know even now it's so hard to talk about. Even now we're like throwing terms around, but I guess part of it, and maybe a lot of it, could be well intentioned too. I mean, people are. It depends whether you're using these terms to try to sell people something, or to shift the blame. Because so I do think that the shame that, and I have a whole chapter in my book actually about the shame that women feel around body size or around almost anything to do with this topic. There's this like immediate shame reaction, and it just logically doesn't need to be, because it's just another health condition like all the other health conditions. So yeah, it's a way to sort of try to destigmatize some of it.
And education. I think very few people, and again, I say this with zero blame, but very few people actually know how to eat well and look after themselves because of the modern environment. We are tending towards a more sedentary lifestyle than certainly 50 years ago. We tend to have more readily available food that may or may not be nutritious for us. It's just not the same environment that it used to be. Convenience plays a huge role.
I just thought of a good reason. So when I was thinking, I always have to kind of anchor it in my work with patients and what kind of is meaningful for me, like, what sort of helps with that discussion with them. And so, because obviously people have been measuring something, which is the scale, or, BMI, or like tape measure. So the body size has been the metric that everyone has been sort of tracked. And what I'm suggesting is, and what I found from, more than 30 years of patients, is that metric is there's going to be a lag time potentially. Well, not potentially, there always is a lag. Often, especially for women, there's often a lag time. So what I will do with my patients is we'll make the changes, whatever it's going to be, like fixing the gut, yes, sheltering from ultra-processed food, strength training, like some combination of things, supplements in some cases. And then for me, the metric to watch is, does their ALT come down on blood tests? Like, you can see that, in my experience anyway, you can see that pretty, and you might see the weight coming down too. So you might see waist, like the waist measure reducing, which would be great. But at least if women aren't seeing that right away, they can at least get some confirmation that the underlying physiology is changing. And that can be very encouraging. So, the chronically elevated insulin really does, especially for some people, really does impair fat loss. So you can see what I mean. Like if you're tracking the scale or fat loss and looking for some kind of feedback as to what's working, you might not see it, whereas you could see if you're, tracking sort of markers of potentially indicators of insulin resistance. So that's why I shift with my own patients. I felt it's like shift the focus off the scale. I know they still want the scale to go down eventually, which is fine, but like shift it to, some tangible, in my view, tangible health markers.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the frustrating things is you often can't see health, certainly when it comes to ALT, AST, all your blood markers. But when you test for them and see them, and you can see things maybe going from the red into the green, then that's a really, really deeply meaningful mark, certainly. I think one of the ways that you and I connected originally was through a discussion about the pregnenolone steal.
I remember this.
Which I find fascinating. And I know it's not a literal phenomenon, but it's a very useful way of understanding the relationship between sex hormones and our original friend, cortisol. Can you explain to people in the most simple terms how this works and what it is?
Right. Yes, I will. Okay, so short version, it's not a thing. So this is the idea that progesterone converts to cortisol, and then that steals progesterone away and increases cortisol. That's actually, if you, I mean, in the finest nuanced detail, that steroid cascade. I mean, it's hard to talk about it without like getting a whiteboard and doing the whole biochemistry, but like it is happening in certain cells in the body. But for all intents and purposes, like the progesterone we make with our regular natural menstrual cycles and or the natural progesterone we might take as part of perimenopause treatment, that is not converting to cortisol. That is converting mostly to something called allopregnanolone, which is a GABA neurosteroid, actually. Like this, it's actually interacts with the GABA receptors in the brain, so it's very calming. Progesterone helps via its neurosteroid, helps to regulate the stress response system that regulates cortisol. So, I mean, indirectly, I guess, in that sense, I'm not having enough progesterone on board. Well, the drop in progesterone at perimenopause, for example, um, it can sort of dysregulate the nervous system. So, and that eventually, and like I said at the beginning, high cortisol can be a biomarker of um, chronically activated nervous system. So the dots do connect, but not sort of literally, not in the language of, progesterone does not convert to cortisol in that way. Mm-hmm. And then just backing it up, because again, I said right at the beginning, I think part of the cortisol dialogue, as far as I can tell, is both around nervous system symptoms and dysregulation, and then the weight gain around the middle. So the drop in progesterone does also influence that weight, mainly because primarily the mechanism I would say is mainly because, like I said earlier, let's relatively high testosterone kind of shine through and redistribute body fat and promote insulin resistance in women. This is where you actually get a very pronounced sex difference. So testosterone in men is kind of almost the more the better. That improves their insulin sensitivity, whereas in women, excess testosterone worsens insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance, but there's a sweet spot for women. We need a certain amount of testosterone. And I will just point out at this juncture, like something that's worth pointing out, a few of the progestins, or the common ingredients in hormonal birth control, are quite strongly androgenic or testosterone-like, including the one in the hormonal coil or hormonal IUD, which I think is why that can promote weight gain around the middle. That's been certainly there's been one recently published study talking about all the other androgen or testosterone symptoms that the hormonal IUD can promote in some women, including like breakouts and hair loss and facial hair. And so it makes total sense that weight gain around the middle could be part of that. So yeah, I mean, this is an example where if I'm trying to troubleshoot insulin resistance and increase in visceral fat in one of my patients, I would definitely want to know if they're on a androgenic progestin or progestogen.
Mm-hmm. So off the back of that, and I'm not quite sure where I'm going to go here, but
yeah, it's all right.
As far as exogenous hormones are concerned, there is, and I support, the desire to have the ability for women to take testosterone in addition to estrogen and progesterone as part of hormonal replacement therapy during peri to post-menopause, should they wish. And at the moment, the options are, or I believe it's just changed, certainly in Australia. I don't know where we stand in the UK at the moment. I think it's pending. It's a male version of testosterone, so you have like an eighth of a tube, right, rather than the female version where you can measure it more simply. So yes, there is a push for that. Yes, chronically low testosterone. Certainly anecdotally, when people start to take testosterone, it can improve brain function and energy. So finding the sweet spot, would you say that would be through blood test? And how do you feel about that generally?
Right. Yeah, fair enough. Good question. So I do talk about this in my perimenopause book. I think, so the interesting thing about testosterone is a very, very interesting hormone. Like, all the hormones are interesting. They all have their own characters like estrogen. Our main estradiol is I talk about it like the super charismatic friend that, the party friend that comes to the party, but at some point you actually just want her to go so you can go to sleep. So I mean, the funny thing is, Hattie, like we right at the outset we talked about how it's important not to talk too much about biochemical things, but I mean now we've been doing that. But testosterone is very powerful, very powerful. And one interesting thing about it is it has in women, less so in men, I think, but in women has a strong anti-anxiety effect. So it definitely makes women feel more fearless, less fearful, more outgoing. That would be true in anyone who takes it, actually, even someone who's not deficient. I think when you first take a little bit of tea, you're going to get kind of a buoyant, less anxious feeling. I think that does attenuate over time. So people want to watch that if they had like a bit of a, it's a powerful drug. So I think the way I would frame it, my patients don't take testosterone. I'm a little cautious with it, mainly because it can promote insulin resistance, as I've been talking about. But I think it's probably okay to do it as long as it's as long as it's in combination with estradiol and progesterone, and that would be in the post-menopause state. Hey, can I survey you? Because I've just come off another interview, and actually all the interviews now I'm just kind of questioning people about the term. One of the things that's happening in the perimenopause space, which is creating a lot of confusion, is the words perimenopause, menopause, and post-menopause is clear. Everyone knows what that is. But what would through your lens, like what would you say what time frame or which part of the transition does the word menopause describe for you?
Menopause, that one word, is for me 365 days after the beginning of your last period. So it's just the one day. Yes.
Yeah.
And then before that, you may have 10, 12, maybe only 4 years that are discernible of perimenopause. And then obviously you've got the rest of your life. So that's what it would mean to me.
But do you ever hear women using, or other practitioners using, the word menopause to describe perimenopause?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is what I'm talking about. So so my terminology is slightly different. I'm actually feeling like I need to call a summit, or I might do it on my Instagram. It's just like, okay, everyone, we need to get our words straight, because this is creating, I mean, in addition to what we've been talking about, like the different hormone names that are floating around, insulin, cortisol, the other part of the confusion, and this is a big problem actually, is that people are using the words differently. So the way I would use it is perimenopause is the transition years, as you say, like 4 to 10 years, up to the 1 year after the final period, at which point you graduate. So that's the word, professor. Yeah. So I work quite closely with a Professor Geraldine Pryor, an endocrinology professor. And so she calls it graduate to menopause. And because epidemiologists, so scientists who talk about population level things, they use the word menopause to describe postmenopause. So when you hear epidemiologists saying there's however many hundreds of millions, menopausal women in the world, they mean postmenopause. So they don't mean in the perimenopause transition. They obviously don't mean on that one day, like menopausal. So depending on who you're talking to, I get a lot of, especially in the UK, the menopause transition is synonymous with perimenopause. It gets shortened to the menopause. So then, the menopause will be like when you have, according to depending on who you're asking, like it's when you'll have heavy periods, when you'll have all, like during the menopause, but actually that's perimenopause. And the reason it's so important is that they're hormonally different, like hormonally very different. So especially in the early phases of perimenopause, estrogen is higher than normal. And then and progesterone goes away. I would say the onset of perimenopause is pretty much defined by when progesterone starts to drop away. And then obviously into postmenopause is that kind of stable, lower estrogen state. So depending on, I guess the reason the segue was when I was thinking, but depending on when you're going to, depending on where you are in that transition phase, that will very much affect which hormones you decide to take.
Yes.
And Are you getting people who are finding taking testosterone helpful during perimenopause transition or postmenopause, or when would you find that
Well,
people
this is
want it?
super interesting, and I will reiterate. I know we did off air, but
Yeah.
reiterate very strongly. I am not a medical
No, fair
practitioner,
enough. Yeah. No, fair.
but
Yeah.
with conversations through friends
Yeah.
and through clients,
Yeah.
yes, in perimenopause,
In
I've
peri. Yeah.
encountered a lot of women taking testosterone, and mostly with positive effect. However,
Yeah.
there are a number of us, and this is, again, I find this really interesting. So I'm in this group that feels a huge amount of shame about
Oh,
being unable to take, and this is another word, so
yeah. Yeah.
MHT, HRT, MHRT.
Right.
So I can't take hormone replacement therapy because my guess is I'm just so super sensitive to hormonal, exogenous hormones that it makes everything worse. Everything. I've tried it twice at different periods and I think I know I'm still in perimenopause, but I'm hoping at the very, 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 very tail end of it. It doesn't work for me. But because there's such a powerful crowd who do take it and advocate for it, and I know that it impacts some women's lives to the point of going from the deepest, darkest point to being able to live again. So I advocate for HRT. I can't take it, but it makes me feel less than because I can't join that club.
Oh, that's so interesting. Everyone, it's so interesting, isn't it? Almost everyone I talk to in the perimenopause space is having quite a different experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, do not feel shame. I mean, okay, that's interesting. I was framing. I want to come back. I have a few questions for you now, but first, let's give you a bit more background on me. I think I mentioned I'm an evolutionary biologist. So through my lens, menopause, we evolved to spend decades post reproductive years, and the humans are uniquely female humans are uniquely adapted to spending decades in the low estrogen state. So I definitely, okay, it's also nuanced because I do take a little bit of estrogen myself. But I'm definitely not in the camp where I think everyone must take it. And it's interesting that you feel the shame around not taking it because that would have swung. Because I think 10 years ago, women felt shame around taking it.
Yeah.
So this is an example how what you're describing right now is kind of what I talked about a few times already. My experience working with women 35 years, women feel shame about
Everything.
a lot of things. Like I was talking about women feel shame around insulin resistance. I mean, that's not a thing to be ashamed of. Like that's like, and it's nothing to be shameful about taking hormone therapy or not taking it, or so that's a very intriguing. One thing, the other thing about it is HRT. The problem with the generic terminology, like people say, oh, people ask me like, is it good to take HRT? It's like, well, it depends. Like, so first of all, it depends which hormone. So like specifically, because through my view, what I would typically prescribe or recommend in the early high estrogen phases of perimenopause would be progesterone only. So that would be eutrogestin only. And at some point negotiating, bringing in some estrogen if and when necessary. I mean, there's lots of nuance around that. And then also my view would be then negotiate on top of that, or we can talk about this, but like when does testosterone, if and when testosterone would come in. There's another, well, if I had full disclosure, we do a little show and tell that I'm taking an androgen as well, but I take DHEA just
Right.
because for its androgenic effect, kind of what you're describing, like it does have an anti-anxiety effect. What benefits, or if you want to share, what benefits did you get from testosterone? Was it more around mood or?
Initially, yeah, mood, clarity of thought, focus, energy, because mine was very, 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 very low indeed, but started off with, started off with an endocrinologist who said, if I give you testosterone, you're going to turn into a hirsute prepubescent boy overnight, which I believe is incorrect. Unless he were to give me thousands and thousands of milligrams, but that's another thing. So I went to see somebody else and he said, start with DHEA. So I did that for a month and then eventually took testosterone. I don't take anything anymore because I then did try the estrogen progesterone combination. And each time, it's only been 2 occasions, but I think 3 or 4 years apart. It's been horrible.
No,
it's just not for me.
No.
That's all.
Fair enough. I am curious. I mean, not as something you should do, but I am curious. Did you ever try progesterone on its own?
No. But I puffed up like a pufferfish.
Estrogen. That's
okay.
estrogen. Yeah, because estrogen can cause a histamine release in some people. So anyone who's got like fluid retention from HRT, that's from the estrogen part. Progesterone's a diuretic. It was so funny, Hattie. We swore at the beginning, we're not going to get too biochemical. We're actually going to debunk the overuse of biochemical words. But now, yeah, I mean, there is, sometimes the devil is in the details with, especially around hormone therapy, it's not a one size fits all, obviously. And it's also very context dependent. Like, is it someone who's has, still those early high estrogen, like heavy period years of perimenopause, or is it someone who's like 3 years after her final period? Like, those are totally
There's
different.
There's a big
situations.
difference.
Like they couldn't be more different, actually. The only person who might be more different is like a baby. Like, hormonally speaking, like it's so different. And so why we would think there's like a one size fits all HRT that's going to match like both of those women, it's just not realistic. But testosterone, I think it's definitely good for libido as well. I think can be used. No, it's dose dependent. It's not going to, if it does cause facial hair, that's too much.
That's too high. Yeah, for sure. But I would also say that more is not more, whether you're talking about pretty much anything, really, not just hormones, but more of anything. Better is going to be better, but more is not always the answer. And I do see a lot of people being given increasing doses of whatever it might be they are on, if it begins to have an adverse effect. Sometimes it's the solution, sometimes it's just not.
So one of the reasons, I might just circle back to, just again, for people listening who cannot, like you, sort of reacted badly to hormone therapy, don't want to take it, like can't take it, or can't take it for health reasons, or don't want to take it. I just want to put that in a bit more context. Like I've already said that biologically, we are adapted. It's not a deficiency. It is not hormone deficiency. And that the language around that, as my scientist brain was like, that is incorrect. Like it's not equivalent to like a thyroid hormone deficiency or something like that, which is a legitimate deficiency. We are adapted to do that. But what can make it challenging, and I do have a whole section in actually mainly my perimenopause book about this, but so in traditional people, in the women around the world, and we know that, like we can observe them, like the Hadza in Tanzania, people like that, people who are still living a very traditional lifestyle, they go through menopause, into menopause, or however you want to describe it, through perimenopause. They are happy about it. They just generally just happy about it. They do not experience symptoms. So there's nothing about the process that is inherently symptomatic or is inherently disease producing. The fact that the transition can be like that in our modern world is to do with something called evolutionary mismatch. Have you heard that, come across that term before?
But I'm hooked already.
Okay. So it's basically just, like something in our biology that's not working the way it should be because we're living in the wrong environment. I mean, that's different than being broken. We're not broken. Mm-hmm. Our biology is trying to do what it needs to do. I mean, all of this applies to the insulin resistance that I was just talking about as well. Our biology is trying to do what it's always done for hundreds of thousands of years. And it's and the environment is making that very hard. So the environment is essentially creating symptoms. So that would be definitely the case for the perimenopausal transition. A lot of women around the world living more traditional lifestyles don't have symptoms at all. And I think the reason a lot of women in our world, in our culture, environment do is a number of things. It's obvious things like environmental toxins and the modern food supply, which we've already talked about, which it's actually being pushed into insulin resistance itself. Makes the whole perimenopause transition harder, because one of the things the brain has to do with the perimenopausal recalibration and getting used to lower levels, adapting to lower levels of estradiol, the brain has to be really good at accessing burning fat for energy, basically. So accessing body fat for energy. And if it needs a steady supply of like fatty acids coming to the brain. And if the tap on that is cut off because of chronically elevated insulin, that's going to make it really hard. And this is, anyway, this ties into various things. But so this is why, I guess the reason I'm bringing it up is if you're like, for someone who's very metabolically healthy through a combination of doing good things and also, luck to some extent, some of us are just, that could make for a very easy perimenopause. I recently had this, this sort of speaks to some of what we've already been talking about, but I had another comment on my social media of someone who said, she's like, okay, so I'm, 47 and I'm clearly in perimenopause. My periods are becoming farther and farther apart. She's like, but I feel fine. Does that mean something's wrong with me? Like all she's heard is like the catastrophizing. And she's like, I said, nothing is wrong with you. Like, go live your life. You are fine. I'll just point out women have been outliving men in every culture and throughout history, long before hormone therapy. So I think you're going to be fine without hormone. I don't know if that helps at all, but
I'm not worried about me. I just sometimes feel like a bit of a fraud because people come to me expecting me to be loaded up with all these things so that I can share my answers for me with them. And I've got different answers for me. But that's not to say I'm anti-HRT by any stretch. I'm anti it for me. But if it works for somebody, then that's really great. And, but equally, yes, what I would like for every woman is to be able to be like your 47-year-old who made the comment, go through, have a great time, live your life. Don't worry about anything. That's the ultimate goal for everybody, to not need any additional support.
I've done a few social media posts on this as well lately. It's like, maybe you're okay. Like, maybe, health is not this never ending self-improvement project. Like maybe you're pretty good and you could just go live your life. Like, because lives are to be lived. I mean, lives are not to be constantly like micromanaging our health at every turn. Like, so that's part of it. One thing I want to say, one other thing about the evolutionary mismatch, which might be interesting to you or to your listeners. One of the reasons, potentially, a lot of scientists agree on this, why women in our culture, our environment, suffer more symptoms is that generally through our reproductive years, we are higher estrogen than people living a more traditional lifestyle. So that's coming from a few places. A lot of it's to do with the microbiome. So we're kind of running it hot. Basically, we're running pretty high estrogen through especially if we're on hormonal birth control, like estrogen birth control. We're basically running hot at this high level of estrogen for a few decades. And then that's a bigger adjustment, right? So like in the really traditional, I give this example in my book, I think, but like in the really traditional lifestyle, if you think about it, they were having periods. So it's a myth that women, they had much fewer. And a traditional scenario was probably women would like have their final baby at 42, breastfeed till 45. Breastfeeding, by the way, is a state of very low estrogen. So it's kind of menopausal levels of estrogen during lactational amenorrhea, if the periods are suppressed by breastfeeding. And then just cruise from that low estrogen of breastfeeding pretty much just to the low estrogen of menopause and postmenopause and beyond, and just never have any estrogen withdrawal, never go through those dramatic ups and downs, just be like, happy and well. So, I mean, I hope that helps people kind of understand so if people are experiencing a lot of symptoms right now and feel like, as you say, estrogen saved their life, I mean, there's some backstory to that probably. And again, none of that to say don't take it. I mean, I take it a little bit myself, but I take a small dose. I sort of feel like I'm just taking like a fairy dusting, just a little bit, going forward. I don't know how long I'll keep doing it, but
see how it goes.
One size fits all.
Yeah. I think that's probably the most important thing, is that there isn't any one size fits all. There isn't any silver bullet. There are lots of different parts to the jigsaw puzzle, and it's working out which parts suit you, which you already have, which you don't need, all that kind of thing. And then being able to live your life. Otherwise, I tell you, it's a full-time job to micromanage every aspect of diet or medication and exercise and then self-care and stress management. I mean, it takes up 12 hours of your day.
Well, and this brings us back to what we started with, talking about the anxiety being produced by some of these, concepts of high cortisol and I guess even insulin resistance to some extent. I think it's a more useful metric to track than body weight. But it kind of brings us back to that is like often with my patients as part of their treatment, I'll be like, okay, no more health podcasts. I mean, that's bad for you actually, but like a nice, just take a break from health podcasts. Like maybe go listen to some history podcasts or like some, something else or read a book or, at least, ration them carefully or maybe like select down. It could be one of the ones you keep could be Hattie's, but, select down to some that are actually helpful and yeah, because it's too much. And the same, like I'll tell people to unfollow health accounts on Instagram. That might mean they unfollow me, which is fine. I mean, I'm actually quite happy when I've had a few people through the years saying, "Oh, I used to follow you on Instagram, but then my health was so good that I didn't need to." And I'm like, "That's fine. Unfollow. Right. If you don't need advice on periods and hormones, like if your hormones are like if you're happy in postmenopause and cruising along, then by all means, like." Unfollow.
Then job done. Exactly.
Job done. Exactly. Yeah.
So to wrap up then, Lara, because I do appreciate, I mean, I could listen all day, but what would be your top 1 or 2 pieces of advice to perimenopausal women?
I think it's a good question. I think step number 1 is figure out where you are in the transition. I do talk about this a bit in my book, but people can find the information everywhere. Like, are you in those early close together periods, really high estrogen stage, or are your periods like 6 months apart and you're in the final about to graduate to menopause? Because those are so hormonally different. That's step number 1. Because if you are in the super high estrogen phase, that's think about histamine and things. Even just like simple antihistamine can sometimes give great relief for like insomnia and heavy periods and things like that. So that's one piece. Well, I guess I mean, everyone's got their favorite things, but I mean, I guess I would say, take a real think about alcohol. It's so hard. I felt very sad about not being able to have beer in my late 40s, but I was just like every time I would sit down at a dinner or something, I'm like, I could have this beer and it'd be really nice. Or I could sleep through the night and not wake up in a sweat at like 3 a.m. So like, which would I rather have? So it's tough. I mean, I know depending on people's best. Some people don't drink at all, which is fine. But like, so some people, it's a tough thing to give up. And I would say there is hope, like in the postmenopause, halcyon, quiet, like nice years. Often you can bring back a little, the occasional like couple drinks a week, and it's not a big deal.
Excellent advice. Yeah. And yes, the alcohol transition I find in itself actually, because we used to certainly as a sort of friendship group drink quite well. And now, most of us don't drink, or it's 1 a week or something like that. And actually, because of the choice you have to make, and it's, can I enjoy this drink, or would I prefer to sleep? And sometimes it's, I would really like to enjoy this drink and suffer the consequences. Yep. Yeah. And then I won't do it again. Where can people find you, Lara?
Yeah, I'm easy to find. So I was just thinking the other day, I haven't come across any other Lara Bridens, which is incredibly lucky. I don't know how that's happened. I'm sure it won't last, but at the moment, as far as I know, the only Lara Briden. So I'm larabriden.com, and then people can from there link to my 3 books, and all my social media is at Lara Briden.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much for your time and all your information. It's been fascinating to me, certainly, and I'm sure everybody else. So thank you very much. To meet you. You too. You can find Lara at larabriden.com, and as she said, Lara Briden pretty much everywhere on all the platforms. As I mentioned earlier, I've opened up my life and performance coaching. It's opened up my own life in the most extraordinary way, and I finally feel grounded in my own self. I offer a combination of human design, energetic alignment, and nourishment that covers physical, mental, and emotional aspects. So if you're feeling a bit lost, you're not enjoying the thrill of work, or indeed anything, life is feeling flat, or perhaps you want a change of direction, then drop me a line and we can chat. Hattie@realmenopausetalk.com. Thank you for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.